When we added and subtracted decimals manually without a calculator, we lined the numbers up by the decimal place. With multiplication and division, that's not how we approach it. Shifts a little bit. Instead, what we do for multiplication is right align the numbers. So we would write down 5.4, and then we would write 7 right below that. So both numbers are aligned to the right rather than being lined up by the decimal place. Then we just multiply as normal, essentially ignoring the decimal place. So we would take 7 times 4, which would be 28. Carry the 2 would give us 7 times 5 would be 35, plus 2 would be 37. So we have 378, but then we count how many decimal places exist in the original problem. In this case, there's only one number following the decimal point. So our final answer is going to have one number following the decimal point, giving us 37.8. To divide two numbers, we start off with a similar setup for how we would perform long division. We take 6.6 divided by 2.5, but then we need to get rid of the decimals. So what we're going to do is take the decimal place inside that division tool and shift it to the right one place. As long as we do the same thing to the number on the outside, we haven't changed our final answer, our final value. So what we're doing is rewriting this problem as 66 divided by 25. Now we would ask ourselves, how many times does 25 go into 66? Which would be 2. 2 times 25 would give us 50, and then we're following the steps for long division. We subtract those two results, which will give us 16. And then we need to drop down the next digit. But in order to do that, we need to put in some placeholder values here. So that's where our decimal place is, right after the 66. And we have additional zeros here, however many we need to include to complete the problem. So the next thing we do is drop down that 0, and then ask ourselves, how many times does 25 divide into 160, which would be 6 times. 25 times 6 would be 150. We'll subtract, which will leave us with 10. And then we drop down that next placeholder 0 to get 100. 25 divides into 104 times. So that'll give us 100, and that will subtract out to 0. Then what we do is identify where our decimal place is in the problem and bring that straight up into our final answer. So in this case, that decimal place comes right after the 66, so our decimal place will land right between the 2 and the 6, making our final answer 2.64. Again, it can be helpful to review how we do those processes manually, but we'll be able to use a calculator in this course. So now we'll take a look at a few examples of how we would complete these by hand. How we would complete these using a calculator. We'll run into a similar issue here with how we input the negative signs into our problem. Again, that depends on how your particular calculator works, but something that I would suggest is to initially ignore any positive and negative signs at all. So in part A, we're just going to take 7.166 times 6.285. And that will give me 45.038 if we round that to just a few decimal places. Let's go ahead and just include that whole value here. 45.03831. If we rounded that to, say, 3 decimal places, then that would be, let me go back. So we're saying this is exactly equal. And then if we round this to 3 decimal places, this would be approximately 45.038. Now, initially we started off with a positive value times a negative value. Intuitively, we should be able to understand that we're taking a positive times a negative, meaning our final answer should actually be negative 45.038. You can also input that negative sign with your calculator if it has those tools, but we can also look at each problem and make that decision intuitively. In part B, we're taking a negative number times a positive number, so whatever answer we end up with should be negative. So when we take 5.448 times 0.642, we get 3.497616. If we round that to 3 decimal places, that would be 3.498. And since we had a negative times a positive, we know that should be a negative 3.498. Similarly, in part C, we have a positive divided by a negative. Since one of those values is negative, we're going to end up with a negative value. To do that division step, we'll take 9.474 and we'll divide by 6.163, which will give us, rounded to 3 decimal places, approximately 1.537. And again, that will be negative since we had a positive times a negative. As just a quick side note here, keep in mind if we had a negative times a negative, then that would end up being a positive result. And obviously, if we had 2 positive numbers multiplied together, that result would be positive. So getting familiar with how you use your calculator and either including that negative sign in your calculation or thinking about it intuitively and attaching it to your final answer.